September 1943. Location: a captured farmhouse near Salerno, Italy. Time: 03 Ra local. The air was thick with the scent of cordite and dry Italian plaster. Outside, the distant hydraulic thud of American naval artillery was a grim metronome for the men of the 29th Panzergrenadier Division. Inside a makeshift intelligence post, amidst the chaos of a hasty retreat, a small team of German officers, weary but clinically meticulous, unpacked a recent bizarre haul. It was a metal canister, barely marked, containing reels of 35mm film. American training footage. This, they thought, was a trinket, a curiosity. They were the veterans of the Blitzkrieg, the men who had shattered Poland, crushed France, and brought the Soviet Union to its knees. Their doctrine was the gold standard: speed, shock, and the perfect synchronicity of tanks, infantry, and air power. They viewed American fighting methods, their inherited strategies from the Great War, with a mixture of contempt and intellectual dismissal. The Americans, they believed, were an industrial behemoth, yes, but tactically infantile. Their strength lay in sheer numbers, not cleverness. The central irony of the war was that, as the Wehrmacht perfected its tactics against opponents still bound by the trenches of the past, the Allies were quietly studying them, absorbing the lessons of 1940, and building a fighting force that could not just match the Blitzkrieg but exceed it. The intelligence officers had no idea that the mundane reels they held contained the blueprint for their own tactical destruction. The film, crudely spliced and shot on a dusty Californian training ground, was meant to teach the basics of what the Americans called combined arms maneuver, a concept the Germans believed they alone truly mastered. They set up a projector, the flickering light cutting through the tobacco smoke, expecting a parade of wooden, predictable maneuvers. What they saw began as a joke. Infantrymen moved awkwardly, their M1 Garands looking heavy, their movements seemingly disjointed. The tanks, the M4 Shermans, appeared large and clumsy, rolling across the dry, uneven ground. Lehrfilm für Kinder, one major scoffed, a training film for children. But then the tempo shifted. A map graphic flashed up, illustrating a German defensive line. Then the footage cut to the assault. The voice of the American narrator, smooth, professional, chillingly clinical, began to describe what was happening. It wasn't about the tanks leading the charge or the infantry cleaning up afterward. It was about timing. The moment the German command post believed the tank column was committed to a frontal assault, the column vanished. They had peeled off into a dead ground, utilizing terrain as cover, exactly as the German field manuals prescribed. Simultaneously, the infantry, supported by mortar fire, didn't move forward. They moved laterally, pinning the German flanks. And then, the true shock. The screen filled with the image of a squat, powerful fighter bomber, a P-47 Thunderbolt, or perhaps an A-36 Apache, swooping low, its machine guns spitting fire into what the map designated as the German reserve position. This wasn't incidental air support, it was precision integration. The American narrator emphasized a concept: 5-minute fire missions. A German intelligence officer, Hauptmann Becker, froze. He knew the typical Allied artillery response time. 10 minutes, perhaps 15, to coordinate a divisional fire mission. But the film demonstrated a pilot calling for fire support directly to the tank commander, who passed the coordinates to a forward observer, who in turn called in a pre-registered, pre-calculated mission. The entire cycle from observation to ordnance impact was under 5 minutes. Die Geschwindigkeit, Becker whispered, the speed. It was the velocity of the coordination that was terrifying. They weren't fighting an army of the 1930s anymore. They were fighting an army that had synthesized the principles of German shock and awe and married them to an industrial capacity that could sustain that velocity relentlessly. The footage confirmed a growing uncomfortable suspicion. The Americans were not merely reacting, they were proacting. They were using their tanks to bait the defense, their infantry to fix the enemy, and their overwhelming air superiority as highly responsive, decentralized artillery. The strategic brilliance of the Blitzkrieg had been weaponized against its creators, wrapped in the protective armor of American industry. As the reels whirred on, the laughter in the intelligence room died. It was replaced by a grim, sinking realization. The Americans had not just learned how to fight, they had learned how to think like their enemy. And that, in the unforgiving theater of war, was the most dangerous weapon of all. If you are finding the blend of historical detail, technical analysis, and narrative suspense compelling, please consider subscribing and pressing the like button. It supports our efforts to bring you more in-depth documentaries on the history of strategy and technology. November 1943. Location: the muddy, constricted ground of the Gustav Line. Subject: the evolution of the M4 Sherman. For the veteran soldier of the Wehrmacht, the M4 Sherman tank was initially a source of dismissive confidence. It was tall, an easy target, and its early 75mm gun lacked the penetrating punch of the German long-barreled 7.5 cm KWK-40 on the Panzer IV, or the formidable 8 cm KWK-36 of the Tiger. The German crew saw the Sherman as mechanically vulnerable, its silhouette an open invitation. Ronsons, they called them, a derogatory reference to a popular lighter, prone to catching fire from a well-placed hit. But the fear of the Sherman in the Allied advance was not derived from its armor or its primary gun. It was born from its sheer, overwhelming ubiquity and its revolutionary role as a force multiplier. The training film, which had now been circulated up the intelligence chain to Army Group Command, detailed this terrifying concept with brutal clarity. The Germans had focused on the tank duel, one Panther versus one Sherman. The Americans, however, saw the Sherman not as a king of the battlefield, but as a highly mobile armored platform whose main function was to facilitate the attack of the infantry and the artillery. The film showed the Sherman in tactical doctrine using its high-explosive HE shells with devastating effect. Against the Panzer IV, the HE shell was useless. Against a German MG-42 machine gun nest, dug in and concealed, that 75mm HE shell was a surgical wrecking ball. The Sherman was a close support artillery piece on tracks. Here is where the perspective shift was truly chilling. A German infantryman, trapped by the advance, would naturally focus on the approaching tank. They knew the procedures: wait for the precise shot, use the Panzerfaust, or call in anti-tank guns. What they didn't anticipate, as the captured film illustrated, was the psychological suppression loop. As the Sherman opened fire with HE rounds, deafening and demoralizing the German infantry, the Allied riflemen, the well-trained Marines or the mechanized infantry, would use the tank's fire and smoke as cover to advance almost to point-blank range. A German veteran's account, recorded from interrogation, described the terror. The noise was unbearable. Not the slow crack of artillery, but a constant close-range thunder. You could not hear your commanding officer. You could not hear your own weapon being fired. And when the fire finally lifted, the Americans were there, 20 meters away, already throwing grenades. The tank had not killed us. It had simply delivered the men who would. The film meticulously explained the American solution to German anti-tank obstacles: the Dozer blade attachment. Simple, yet strategically profound. The Sherman, previously halted by a minefield or a tank trap, could now push the earth and clear a path for the infantry and supply trucks with relentless efficiency. This capability was industrial, tactical, and psychological all at once. It meant no static defense was truly safe. The captured film highlighted a specific, frightening tactical move: the flank flare. The Sherman, instead of blindly advancing, would deliberately expose its flank for a moment, drawing anti-tank fire from a concealed position. Immediately, a pre-designated infantry squad, observing the tracer fire, would rush the revealed position, while the tank used smoke rounds to blind the anti-tank gun. The tank acted as a highly expendable, armored decoy to expose fixed positions. The realization for the German General Staff was stark. They were not fighting a handful of tough tanks. They were fighting a system where every unit, tank, infantry squad, forward observer, was an interchangeable, highly responsive sensor and effector. The Sherman, despite its individual shortcomings, was the backbone of this system. It was the armored manifestation of American industrial and tactical flexibility. Early 1944. Location: Headquarters, Army Group B, Western Front. Subject: Command, Control and Communications, C3. The Germans understood the power of speed, but they were now beginning to grasp the chilling efficiency of American coordination. The pivotal advantage revealed in the training film was not hardware, but the invisible network of command, control, and communications, C3, that tied the Allied forces together. For the Wehrmacht, command authority flowed strictly from the top down. The tank commander acted on the division's orders, the division on the corps' orders. This structure was effective for large-scale maneuvers, but suffered from rigidity and response lag, especially when under attack. The American doctrine, as presented in the film, was a revelation of tactical decentralization. It focused on the company-level decision-making. The footage showed infantry company commanders making rapid, crucial decisions in the field, bypassing layers of command thanks to superior radio technology. The key was the radio itself. The SCR-536 handy-talkie and the SCR-300 walkie-talkie, though heavy and often unreliable in theory, were deployed in numbers the German army could only dream of. The film demonstrated that every critical element, the forward infantry patrol, the tank platoon leader, the artillery liaison, was connected by voice radio. The German system, relying on wired lines and less reliable short-range radios, took 30 minutes to reroute an artillery call. The American system, by having the artillery forward observer FO embedded with the frontline unit, could achieve the 5-minute fire mission because the FO had the authority and the technical means, pre-calculated firing tables, to bypass the lengthy command chain. But the most potent aspect of C3 was the role of the Tactical Air Controller, TAC. The film dedicated a chilling segment to the KAS, Close Air Support System. The narrator explained the pilot's perspective. Your aircraft is an extension of the ground commander's rifle. You do not choose your targets, the man on the ground does. The Wehrmacht pilots, the Luftwaffe, were trained to seek out and destroy high-value strategic targets or engage in dogfights. The American pilots, particularly those flying the P-47 Thunderbolt and P-51 Mustang, were trained to be flying artillery batteries. They didn't need to circle for 20 minutes waiting for HQ approval. They spoke directly to the tank commander or the infantry captain. A German engineer tasked with analyzing the film's technical details wrote in his report, "The American tactical system treats air superiority not as a strategic goal but as a utility. It is like turning on a light switch. The speed of the air-to-ground communication is the actual weapon." The film then revealed the dark art of deception and misdirection. It wasn't just about attacking, it was about appearing to attack in one place while the real strike occurred somewhere else. A segment detailed the use of dummy tanks and the strategic deployment of smoke screens. The key insight: smoke was not used merely to hide the Allied advance. It was used to designate the target. The film showed a tank commander firing a smoke round precisely onto a German position. This was the visual beacon for the diving Thunderbolt pilot, whose bombs and rockets would follow the smoke trail. The German soldier, trained to advance through the smoke, was now running toward a position about to be annihilated by a pre-coordinated airstrike. The Germans, masters of the Blitzkrieg's shock, were now facing a faster, more interconnected, and more technologically adaptable version of their own doctrine. The enemy was invisible, linked by a web of radio waves and aerial command, making the battlefield a constant high-speed trap. June 1944. Location: the Bocage country of Normandy. Subject: the implementation of the new doctrine and the breakdown of German defenses. The intelligence gathered from the captured film was now confronting the brutal reality of the battlefield. The invasion of Normandy confirmed the German High Command's worst fears. What was once seen as awkward training footage was now the standard operating procedure that was tearing apart the West Wall. The American advance through the Bocage, the unforgiving hedgerow country, was a testament to this transformation. Initially, the German defenders had every advantage. The dense network of earth and vegetation turned the fighting into a series of isolated, close-quarters engagements, neutralizing the Allied advantage in mobility and numbers. The American forces initially struggled. The Sherman's high silhouette made it a perfect target peeking over a hedgerow. The infantry found their communications cut, and their advance stalled. This phase confirmed the German intelligence initial assessment. The Americans were slow, but the captured film had provided the anticipation of the solution. it had detailed the American capacity for rapid, on-the-spot technological adaptation. The Wehrmacht was soon introduced to the Rhinoceros Sherman, a simple yet brilliant field modification, heavy steel tusks welded to the front of the tank, allowing it to smash through the thick earthen base of the hedgerows, creating instant breakthroughs and avoiding the deadly pre-sighted gaps. This modification was a microcosm of the doctrinal shift, decentralized innovation. The Germans perfected their weapon systems in factories and training schools. The Americans were giving their field mechanics and tank crews the latitude to innovate and solve problems in the heat of battle. The film's central narrative, the transformation from a clumsy force to a lethal one, was playing out in real time. The terror was palpable for the German veterans. A German soldier's final letter, recovered near Saint-Lô, expressed the growing psychological burden. "We used to laugh at the American way of war, so many men, so much steel, so little finesse. Now, the steel is everywhere, and the finesse is in their timing. They don't attack when you expect them to. They attack the moment your line of communication is cut by their fighter-bomber. They attack when your artillery is reloading. They attack when you are listening for the tank and are instead hit by the man with the flamethrower. They have learned the meaning of velocity." The German anti-tank doctrine was based on a fixed battle plan: lure the tank, hit the flank, then reposition. But the Americans, thanks to the tactical freedom shown in the training film, were constantly shifting their focus. The American infantry's aggressive use of the BAR, Browning automatic rifle, was another revelation. The film showed the BAR as a tool not of suppression, but of mobile assault fire. The squad was taught to advance while firing from the hip, keeping the enemy's head down, effectively creating its own fire support, a concept perfected in the Pacific, but now adapted for the European theater. The result of this strategic and technological synthesis was the climax of the breakthrough. In operations like Cobra, the American forces executed exactly the kind of highly coordinated shock-and-awe maneuver the training film had foreshadowed. A massive aerial bombardment prepared the ground, immediately followed by the Rhinoceros Shermans smashing through the hedgerows, and close following infantry who immediately secured the flanks, while the TAC pilots orbited above, ready to engage any counterattack in under 5 minutes. The German lines didn't just bend, they shattered. The enemy, who was supposed to be predictable and rigid, had become flexible, fast, and devastatingly coordinated. 1945 and beyond. Location: post-war analysis centers, Washington, D.C. and Bonn. Subject: the lasting impact of American doctrinal evolution. The war ended not with a single massive decisive clash like Cannae or Waterloo, but with the systematic, inexorable, and industrial-scale disintegration of the German war machine. The capture of Berlin and the final surrender were merely the formal signing off on a process of collapse that had begun months, perhaps years, earlier. And at the heart of understanding that collapse lay a simple, dusty reel of film, the American training video. Initially dismissed as a source of military comedy, it became a vital historical artifact, a literal instruction manual detailing the final phase of the Western Front's destruction. The great strategic irony of World War II is perhaps its most profound lesson. The nation that invented the concept of the Blitzkrieg, lightning war, was ultimately defeated by a faster, more technologically advanced, and infinitely more industrially sustainable version of its own doctrine. The Germans, driven by a cult of technical perfection and scarcity, prioritized the individual weapon, a philosophy best exemplified by the majestic, fearsome, but rare Tiger tank and the futuristic, yet chronically underserved Me-262 jet fighter. Conversely, the Americans prioritized the weapon system, the communication network, and, crucially, volume. The success of the American effort was not solely the medium-caliber M4 Sherman, nor the robust P-47 Thunderbolt. It was the seamless doctrine of interoperability that the training film had meticulously laid out. The key metrics of victory, in the end, were not measured in tank versus tank kill ratios, but in response time and production capacity. To grasp the scale of this disparity is to understand the inevitable conclusion of the conflict. The American industrial machine produced over 49,000 M4 Shermans, a massive number that permitted tactical profligacy and the immediate replacement of losses. This contrasted starkly with the roughly 1,150 Tiger Waffons and 489 Tiger II tanks produced by Germany, machines that were feared but ultimately fleeting. The American philosophy was one of calculated attrition and continuous pressure. The loss of a single Sherman was a logistical inconvenience. The loss of a Tiger was a strategic disaster. But beyond the crude numbers, a deeper, more insidious power was at play: the decentralization of command. The U.S. Army prioritized the rigorous training of its junior officers and non-commissioned officers, NCOs, in the field, granting them the crucial tactical authority to make immediate on-the-spot decisions. This culture allowed them to exploit the enemy's weaknesses the moment they appeared, often bypassing the bureaucratic layers of command that crippled the German response. This decentralized high-velocity decision-making, which the Germans had seen demonstrated in the film's quick reaction drills, was the final, insurmountable obstacle. It was the ability to fight not as a single ponderous giant, but as a swarm of highly coordinated, fast-moving bees. An excerpt from a post-war Allied analysis summarized the true psychological victory. The German soldier was taught to believe in the unquestionable superiority of his technology and the inherent brilliance of his strategic thought. When the American forces not only matched his strategy through superior command, control and communications, C3, but also overwhelmed him with sheer coordinated volume, the mental fortitude of the Wehrmacht began to erode. They were psychologically defeated by an enemy who refused to follow the predictable script of frontal assault, choosing instead surgical, coordinated strikes. The training film was therefore a powerful, if accidental, window not just into American weapons, but into the core American mindset: pragmatic, ruthlessly adaptable, and focused on solving the immediate, practical problem with whatever tools were at hand. The 5-minute fire mission became the symbol of this new, terrifying velocity. It represented a fundamental, unbridgeable gap in wartime efficiency, the difference between surviving an engagement and being annihilated by a responsive, overwhelming coordination of air, armor, and artillery. The legacy of the war was cemented not in the hardware, which would quickly become obsolete, but in the profound doctrinal shift. The American methods of combined arms, flexible, decentralized, and thoroughly air-supported, would become the bedrock of modern military strategy, influencing the formation and training of NATO forces for the next half-century. The lessons learned in the dusty fields of California, the abstract theories documented in that simple, captured film, proved to be the tangible key to unlocking the German lines in Normandy and forcing the final collapse. The intelligence officers who first viewed those flickering reels in that Italian farmhouse in 1943 had, unknowingly, looked into the future of warfare. They saw the end of the Blitzkrieg as they knew it, and the beginning of a new, faster, more coordinated way of war where communication was king and velocity was lethal. They saw the very tool that would break their formidable lines, not in 5 hours of grinding attrition, but in a crucial, devastating 5 minutes of surgical coordination. If you found this deep dive into the strategic and technological evolution of World War II compelling, don't miss our next historical breakdown where we explore the engineering marvels of the German V2 rocket program. Like this video, share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to our channel for more high-quality documentaries on military history and technological strategy. Your support allows us to continue bringing these vital stories of the past to life.